James Donovan's mansion loomed at the edge of the small town, an imposing figure against the misty morning. The townspeople often spoke in hushed whispers about the reclusive millionaire who lived there. 25 years ago, James was a man of promise and passion, but the tragic death of his fiancée, Emily, had shattered him. Since then, he had withdrawn from the world, burying himself in his business and building walls higher than his estate's iron gates. Meanwhile, Rebecca Johnson's life was unraveling. Just a few weeks ago, she had been living in a modest apartment, working 2 jobs to support her daughter, Lily. But when the diner she worked at closed suddenly, Rebecca found herself on the streets with barely enough money to buy food, let alone pay rent. Her 6-year-old daughter tried to be brave, clinging to her stuffed rabbit and putting on a smile every time Rebecca looked her way. They were sitting on a bench near the town square one cold evening when James first noticed them. He was in his car, ready to speed past the familiar scenes of the town he no longer cared for, when something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way Rebecca's shoulders slumped in defeat, or how Lily clung to her mother's side, eyes wide with innocent curiosity. Against his better judgment, James parked his car and approached them. Rebecca looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious but polite. James hesitated, the practiced lines of detachment dissolving in the face of her vulnerability. "I noticed you two here. It's getting late, and it's not safe out on the streets." "We don't have anywhere else to go," Rebecca admitted, her voice breaking despite her efforts to hold it together. Lily tightened her grip on the stuffed rabbit, her gaze flicking between her mother and the stranger. James swallowed hard, memories of a younger, carefree Emily flashing before his eyes. Without thinking, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a few $100 bills. "Here, take this. Get yourselves something to eat. Find a place to stay." Rebecca's eyes widened, and she shook her head. "I can't take that. We're not beggars." "It's not charity," James insisted, his voice firmer now. "Just take it, please." He pressed the money into her hand, the contact brief but charged with something unspoken. Rebecca looked at the bills, then back at him, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she murmured, the words heavy with relief and something like hope. James nodded curtly, already regretting the impulse. He turned and walked away, feeling the familiar pang of guilt twist in his chest. He knew what it was to feel helpless, to lose everything that mattered. As he got back into his car, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Rebecca hugging her daughter, tears streaming down her face. It was a scene both heartbreaking and strangely comforting. Someone else was struggling, too, and perhaps he had done one small good thing. He tried to push the thought from his mind as he drove back to the mansion. The radio turned up loud to drown out the silence that had grown so thick around him over the years. But that night, sleep eluded him. He found himself thinking about the woman and her child on the cold bench, wondering what had brought them to this point. Morning came, bringing a haze of unresolved emotions. Needing air, James decided to visit Emily's grave, a ritual that had become both punishment and solace. He drove to the small cemetery on the outskirts of town, the place where he had buried his future so many years ago. As he approached the familiar headstone, he froze. Rebecca was there, kneeling in the dew-soaked grass, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Lily stood beside her, looking small and lost, her tiny hand resting on her mother's arm. "What are you doing here?" The words escaped him before he could stop them, harsher than he intended. Rebecca looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I don't know," she stammered, wiping her cheeks. "I was drawn here. It's like I needed to come, but I don't understand why." James stared at her, his heart pounding. This was Emily's resting place. How could this stranger, this woman he had just met, feel any connection to it? He glanced at the name etched into the stone, Emily Grace Donovan, and something unspoken passed between them, an invisible thread tightening around his chest. Lily tugged on his coat. "Who's Emily?" she asked, her voice small and curious, as if the name meant something more to her than it should. James knelt down, his gaze locked on the child's innocent face. "She was someone very special to me," he said softly. Lily nodded, her eyes bright and solemn. "She's special to me too." I see her in my dreams." The words sent a chill down James's spine. He looked up at Rebecca, who seemed as confused and frightened as he felt. Something was happening here, something that defied logic and reason. And for the first time in years, James Donovan felt the icy grip of fear loosen its hold on him, replaced by a burgeoning sense of wonder and uncertainty that he hadn't known in decades. James stood rooted to the spot, unable to tear his eyes away from Rebecca and Lily. The crisp morning air seemed to still around them, thick with something intangible and electric. Rebecca rose slowly, brushing the grass from her knees, her gaze flickering between James and the grave. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to intrude. I had this overwhelming need to come here." James struggled to respond. His mind was a whirl of confusion and unease. "You've never been here before?" She shook her head. "No, I've never been to this part of town. It's like I was guided here, somehow." Guided. The word echoed in James's mind like a distant bell. He glanced at Lily, who was now tracing the letters on Emily's headstone with her tiny fingers. She seemed utterly absorbed, her face serene as if she were touching something sacred. "Lily," he said softly, stepping closer, "why did you come here?" The girl looked up, her eyes wide and innocent. "I had a dream last night," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "A lady told me to come here and talk to her. She was sad and lonely." James felt his throat tighten. He crouched down beside Lily, his heart thudding painfully. "A lady?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Did she say her name?" Lily nodded, her face solemn. "She said her name was Emily." The breath left James's lungs in a rush. He looked up at Rebecca, who was pale and shaking, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't understand what's happening," she murmured, clutching her arms around herself as if trying to hold on to reality. "Lily's been having these dreams for weeks. She talks about things she can't possibly know, things I've never told her." James stood up, his mind racing. This was impossible. How could a little girl who had never met Emily, who had never even known of her existence, know so much? He turned back to the grave, his pulse hammering in his ears. "I think you should leave," he said, the words harsh but necessary. He needed space, needed time to process this. Whatever was happening, it was too much, too soon. Rebecca flinched as if he'd struck her. "We didn't mean any harm," she said, her voice breaking. "We'll go." She took Lily's hand and started to lead her away, but Lily pulled back, her gaze fixed on James. "Don't be sad," she said quietly. "She misses you too." James felt the words like a physical blow. He turned away, swallowing the lump in his throat, his eyes burning with unshed tears. He listened as their footsteps crunched over the gravel path, fading into the distance. Once they were gone, he sank to his knees beside Emily's grave, his hands trembling as he touched the cold stone. "What's happening, Em?" he whispered, his voice raw with pain. "Are you trying to tell me something?" The only answer was the whisper of the wind through the trees, a soft, mournful sigh that seemed to echo his own grief. He stayed there for a long time, lost in memories and questions that had no answers. Hours later, back in his empty mansion, James couldn't shake the image of Lily's innocent face, her small hand on the grave. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid sloshing against the glass as his hand shook. He downed it in one gulp, hoping to dull the edge of his thoughts, but it did nothing to quiet the turmoil inside him. He needed to know more. The rational part of him wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, but something deeper, something desperate, clung to the possibility that there was more to it. He couldn't ignore the way his heart had leapt when Lily spoke Emily's name, or the way Rebecca's eyes mirrored the same fear and confusion that churned within him. Setting the glass down with a resolute thud, James grabbed his coat and headed out. He drove aimlessly through the town, the streets familiar yet distant, his mind replaying every moment at the cemetery like a film reel on loop. He found himself outside the small diner where Rebecca had worked, now boarded up and abandoned. It was a place he'd passed countless times, never giving it a second thought. But now, it seemed to pulse with significance, a starting point for questions that demanded answers. He stepped out of the car and walked to the door, peering through the dusty glass. The inside was dark, tables and chairs stacked haphazardly. He wondered what Rebecca's life had been like here, how she had ended up on the streets with a child who seemed to hold the key to his past. James! He turned, startled. An old friend stood there, his face creased with surprise and concern. Didn't expect to see you around here. Everything all right? James forced a smile that felt brittle and thin. I'm not sure, he admitted. I need to ask you something, George. You know anything about a woman named Rebecca Johnson? George scratched his chin, thinking. Yeah, she worked here until they shut down. Hard worker, quiet. Didn't cause no trouble. Heard she's had a rough go of it lately. James nodded, his thoughts racing. Do you know where she's staying? Last I heard, she was at the shelter on Willow Street, George said, watching James closely. Why do you ask? James hesitated, feeling the weight of his next words. I just need to talk to her. There's something I need to figure out. George nodded slowly, as if sensing the gravity of what wasn't being said. Be careful, James. Some things are better left alone. James clenched his jaw, his resolve hardening. I don't have a choice. With that, he turned and headed back to his car, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Whatever was happening, he was going to find out the truth. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find some way to make peace with the past that still haunted him. As he drove toward the shelter, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet town. The answers he sought felt just out of reach, but he was ready to chase them, no matter where they led. Unbeknownst to him, Rebecca and Lily were already on their way to a new, uncertain future, carrying with them the fragments of a mystery that would forever alter their lives and his. The shelter on Willow Street was a small, weather-beaten building, its walls worn by time and hardship. James hesitated outside, his heart hammering as he reached for the door. What was he doing here, chasing after a woman and child he barely knew? But the image of Lily, her innocent face and those haunting words, "She's special to me too," drove him forward. He stepped inside, the warmth of the room a stark contrast to the chill outside. The receptionist looked up, her expression softening when she saw him. Can I help you? I'm looking for Rebecca Johnson, James said, his voice tight with tension. And her daughter, Lily. The woman's eyes narrowed with concern. Are you family? No, James admitted, then added, just a friend. She seemed to weigh his words before nodding slowly. They're in the common room. Follow me. The sound of laughter greeted them as they walked down a narrow hallway. James's steps faltered when he saw Lily sitting on the floor, surrounded by a few other children. She was animated, her eyes bright as she chattered away. Rebecca was nearby, watching her daughter with a tired but content smile. Rebecca, the receptionist called softly. Rebecca's gaze snapped to James, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded wariness. She stood, smoothing down her worn sweater as if trying to compose herself. What are you doing here? James took a deep breath, feeling suddenly foolish for coming. But it was too late to turn back now. I need to talk to you. About Lily. Rebecca's eyes flickered with fear. What about her? Can we sit? He asked, nodding towards a nearby table. She hesitated, then nodded, leading him to a quiet corner of the room. As they sat, the murmur of voices around them faded into the background. James leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. I need to understand what's happening. How does Lily know about Emily? Rebecca sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. I've been asking myself the same thing. It started a few weeks ago. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, talking about a woman named Emily. I thought she was just dreaming, you know? But then she started saying things she couldn't possibly know. James's pulse quickened. Like what? Like details about Emily's life, Rebecca whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. She knew about the songs she liked, the places she used to go, even the name of her favorite book. I swear, I've never told her any of this. James stared at her, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. But how? It doesn't make any sense. Rebecca looked away, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know, James. I've tried to find some logical explanation, but there isn't one. It's like, she hesitated, then forced the words out. It's like Emily is speaking through her. The idea was so absurd, so impossible, that James almost laughed. But he couldn't deny the truth in Rebecca's eyes, the raw fear and confusion that mirrored his own. He glanced at Lily, who was now playing quietly with a doll, her face serene and untroubled. "I need to talk to her," he said suddenly, standing up. "Please, I just need to ask her a few questions." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but be gentle. She's just a child." James crossed the room, his heart pounding. He knelt beside Lily, who looked up at him with a bright, innocent smile. "Hi, Mr. James." "Hi, Lily," he said, his voice soft. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded eagerly, her doll forgotten in her lap. James took a deep breath. "Do you remember the lady you dream about? Emily?" Lily's smile widened. "Yes, she's really nice. She talks to me sometimes." James felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What does she say?" Lily's eyes sparkled, her voice bright and clear. "She tells me stories. About a big house with lots of flowers. And a piano. She says she used to play songs for you." James's breath caught. Emily had loved playing the piano, and the house she described was the one they had dreamed of buying together, with a garden full of roses. His vision blurred as he looked at the child, his mind spinning. "Do you know where this house is?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily frowned, her little face scrunched in concentration. "No, but she said it was a special place. Somewhere you both wanted to be happy." James swallowed hard, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut. He glanced back at Rebecca, who was watching them with wide, worried eyes. He knew she was struggling to understand all of this, just as he was. "Lily," he said gently, "does Emily tell you anything else? Anything she wants me to know?" Lily tilted her head, her gaze far away for a moment. Then she nodded. "She says she's sorry for leaving, and she misses you." James closed his eyes, the pain of those words slicing through him. He had never found closure after Emily's death, never truly accepted that she was gone. And now, here was this child, speaking as if she knew the deepest, most private sorrows of his heart. "Thank you, Lily," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." She smiled, then picked up her doll again, the conversation already forgotten. James stood, his legs shaky, and made his way back to Rebecca. She looked at him, her expression a mix of fear and hope. "What did she say?" Rebecca asked, her voice trembling. James shook his head, unable to put it into words. "I don't know what to think anymore," he admitted, "but I need to find out the truth, for all our sakes." Rebecca nodded, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." James looked at her, the weight of the past heavy on his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he felt something shift inside him. A small, fragile glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to make peace with the ghosts of his past. He turned to leave, his mind buzzing with 1,000 questions. As he reached the door, he glanced back at Rebecca and Lily, feeling an unexpected surge of protectiveness. They were part of this now, whether any of them wanted it or not, and he would do whatever it took to uncover the truth, no matter where it led them. James couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's face, heard her innocent voice recounting details about Emily's life that no child should know. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with questions and doubts. By dawn, he made up his mind. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to find them sitting around in his mansion, haunted by memories and ghosts. He drove to the town library, a small, unassuming building that he hadn't set foot in for years. The musty smell of old books greeted him as he stepped inside, a reminder of simpler times when he and Emily would spend hours browsing the shelves, dreaming about their future together. But today, his purpose was different. He approached the librarian, an elderly woman who peered at him over her glasses with a curious smile. "Good morning," she said warmly. "What can I help you with today, Mr. Donovan?" James cleared his throat, feeling out of place. "I need to find information on a woman named Rebecca Johnson," he said. "She moved to town recently. Is there any way I can look up public records? The librarian's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. We have some Old Town records on file here, and I can help you access the online database for more recent information. She gestured to a row of computers along the far wall. Just let me know if you need anything. James thanked her and made his way to the nearest computer. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he began typing. He found a few basic records on Rebecca, her employment history, previous addresses. She had moved several times in the past few years, each location marking another step down the ladder of stability and security. But it was when he began to dig deeper that he found something strange. He discovered that Rebecca's family had roots in the town going back generations, something she had never mentioned. Her great-grandparents had lived in a small farmhouse on the outskirts of town, a place long since abandoned and left to decay. James frowned, his heart pounding. Why would she keep something like this a secret? He printed out the records, feeling the thrill of discovery mixed with a growing sense of unease. It seemed impossible, but what if there was a connection between Rebecca's family and Emily's? He drove straight to the farmhouse, his car bouncing along the uneven dirt road that led to the property. The place was a ghost of its former self. Windows shattered and the roof caved in. Weeds choked the path, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. As he stepped out of the car, a shiver ran down his spine. The house seemed to watch him, silent and accusing. He approached cautiously, the dry grass crunching beneath his feet. Inside, the air was still and suffocating, dust motes dancing in the beams of sunlight that filtered through the broken windows. He made his way through the dilapidated rooms, searching for anything that might explain Rebecca's connection to the town, or to Emily. In one corner, he found a pile of old newspapers and family photographs, their edges curled and yellowed with age. He sifted through them carefully, his breath catching when he came across a picture of a young woman who looked eerily familiar. It was Emily, or at least it looked like her. But this photo was decades old, far older than any picture of her that James had ever seen. His heart pounded as he turned the photo over. Written in elegant script on the back were the words, Elizabeth Johnson, 1936. Johnson. The name sent a jolt through him. He stared at the photo, his mind racing. Could it be that Rebecca's family and Emily's were connected somehow? Was Elizabeth an ancestor of Rebecca's? And if so, what did that mean for everything Lily had been saying? His hands shook as he stuffed the photo into his pocket. He needed to talk to Rebecca, needed to tell her what he had found. But as he turned to leave, a shadow shifted in the corner of his vision, and he froze. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing through the empty house. Silence. He stepped forward cautiously, his heart hammering in his chest. But there was no one there. Only the lingering sense of something watching him, something just out of reach. He shook his head, feeling foolish. The house was empty. It had been for years. But as he left, the sense of unease clung to him, a shadow that followed him all the way back to town. He pulled out his phone and dialed Rebecca's number, his fingers trembling as he waited for her to pick up. "Hello?" Her voice was wary, guarded. "Rebecca, it's James. I need to see you. There's something you need to know." There was a pause, then a sigh. "What is it, James? I'm not sure I can handle any more surprises today." "It's important," he insisted. "Please, just meet me at the diner in an hour." She agreed reluctantly, and he hung up, his thoughts racing. He drove back to town, his mind a tangled mess of questions and fears. By the time he arrived at the diner, he felt like he was on the verge of unraveling. Rebecca was already there, sitting at a corner table with Lily beside her. The little girl was drawing something on a napkin, her face serious and focused. James hesitated, then walked over and sat down across from them. Rebecca looked up, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "What is it, James? What did you find?" He pulled out the photo, his hands unsteady as he placed it on the table. "This," he said quietly. "I found this at your family's old farmhouse." Rebecca picked up the photo, her brow furrowing. "This is my great-grandmother," she murmured, her voice laced with confusion. "But what does this have to do with anything?" "Look at her," James said, his voice tense. "Doesn't she look familiar?" Rebecca stared at the photo, then gasped. She looks like Emily, she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. How is that possible? I don't know, James said, his voice raw, but I think there's more to this than we realize. I think your family and Emily's. I think there's a connection here, something that goes back generations. Rebecca shook her head, her hands trembling as she set the photo down. This doesn't make any sense. Why would Lily know things about Emily? Why would she? I don't know, James said again, his heart aching with the weight of it all. But we need to find out. For Lily's sake, and for ours. Rebecca looked at him, her eyes searching his. What do we do? James took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of the task ahead of them. We find out the truth, he said simply, whatever it takes. As he spoke, he glanced at Lily, who was still focused on her drawing. His breath caught when he saw what she had sketched. A house, surrounded by flowers, with a figure standing in the doorway. It was the same house he and Emily had dreamed of, the same vision that had haunted his thoughts for years. Lily looked up at him, her eyes bright with a knowledge that seemed far beyond her years. Emily says everything will be okay, she said softly. James felt his heart break and mend all at once. He reached out, covering Lily's small hand with his own. I hope she's right, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, because now, more than ever, he needed to believe that there was a reason for all of this. A reason that went beyond chance and coincidence. A reason that might finally bring him peace. That night, James tossed and turned in his massive, empty bed, the silence of the mansion pressing down on him like a weight. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and fractured. He found himself standing in the middle of a sunlit garden, surrounded by roses. Their scent was intoxicating, wrapping around him like a warm embrace. The air shimmered with a surreal glow, and everything felt vivid, almost too real to be a dream. He turned, and there she was, Emily, standing by the white gazebo they had once planned to build in their dream home. She looked exactly as he remembered, radiant, with her dark hair tumbling over her shoulders, her green eyes sparkling with life. James's heart ached at the sight of her, the pain of losing her rushing back like a tidal wave. Emily, he breathed, his voice trembling. She smiled, that familiar, heartbreaking smile. You're so stubborn, James, always looking for answers. He took a step closer, his chest tight with longing and confusion. Why are you here? What's happening? I don't understand any of this. She reached out, her fingers ghosting over his cheek, and he felt the warmth of her touch as if she were truly there. I'm trying to help you see, she whispered, to see what's right in front of you. Help me understand then, he pleaded. Lily, Rebecca, how do they fit into all of this? Why do they know things about you that no one else could know? Emily's expression softened, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored his own. The past and the present are connected, James. You've always known that. You just need to open your heart. He shook his head, frustration bubbling up inside him. I don't know what that means. Please, just tell me what I'm supposed to do. She stepped back, her form beginning to blur and fade. You have to let go of the past to see the truth. You have to let go. Wait, he cried, reaching out as she dissolved into a swirl of light and roses. Don't leave me, Emily, please. But she was gone, and James jolted awake, gasping for breath, his heart racing. The room was dark and silent, the dream lingering like a shadow around him. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in his mind. Let go of the past to see the truth. What truth? What was he supposed to let go of? He felt as lost and confused as ever, but there was a new determination burning inside him. He would find the answers, no matter what it took. The next day, he called Rebecca. Her voice was weary but kind when she answered, and they arranged to meet at the park, a neutral place where Lily could play while they talked. As he drove there, the dream replayed in his mind, every detail sharp and clear. Rebecca was sitting on a bench when he arrived, her eyes shadowed with fatigue but her smile warm. Lily was nearby, chasing a butterfly with the exuberance only a child could muster. Thanks for meeting me, James said as he sat beside her. He glanced at Lily, his heart twisting at the sight of her carefree joy. There's something I need to tell you. I had a dream last night about Emily. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. A dream? What kind of dream? He took a deep breath, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. She was there, in a garden. She told me that the past and the present are connected, that I need to let go to see the truth. I don't know what it means, but it felt so real, like she was trying to tell me something important. Rebecca looked down at her hands, her expression thoughtful. I've been having strange dreams too, she admitted quietly. Not about Emily, but about places I've never been, people I don't know. It's like pieces of a puzzle I can't put together. James stared at her, his pulse quickening. What kind of places? A house, surrounded by trees, she said slowly. It feels familiar, but I know I've never been there. And there's always this sense of longing, like I'm missing something or someone. A chill ran down James's spine. That's the house Emily and I wanted to build, he said, his voice tight. The one we talked about, dreamed about. How can you know about that? Rebecca shook her head, looking as bewildered as he felt. I don't know. It's like these dreams are coming from somewhere else, something outside of me. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the unspoken between them heavy and oppressive. Lily's laughter floated over, and they both turned to watch her. She was holding a stick, tracing something in the dirt. James squinted, his heart stopping when he saw what she had drawn. It was the same house he and Emily had dreamed of, down to the last detail. The tall oak tree beside it, the wraparound porch, the flowers blooming wildly along the path. He felt a shudder of recognition, the image pulling him back to a time and place he had tried to forget. Lily, Rebecca called, her voice trembling. What are you drawing? The little girl looked up, her face bright with a smile. It's the house from my dreams, Mommy. The one where the lady with the pretty hair lives. She says we're all going to be happy there. James and Rebecca exchanged a stunned look, the pieces of their fractured realities shifting into a picture that was both terrifying and extraordinary. What do we do? Rebecca whispered, her voice breaking. James took a deep breath, the dream still vivid in his mind. I think we need to find that house, he said slowly. If it exists, I think that's what Emily is trying to tell us. Rebecca nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and hope. But how? Where do we even start? He glanced back at Lily, who was humming softly as she continued to draw. I think Lily might know, he said softly. We need to follow her dreams, see where they lead us. Rebecca looked at him, her expression torn between disbelief and the fragile hope that this, somehow, was the answer they had been searching for. You really think this is possible? James met her gaze, his resolve hardening. I don't know, he admitted, but we have to try. We owe it to Emily and to Lily. Rebecca nodded, the fear in her eyes giving way to something stronger, something that resonated deeply with James. They were in this together now, bound by a mystery that defied explanation and a hope that transcended reason. As they watched Lily play, a sense of purpose settled over James, the uncertainty of the past few days solidifying into a clear, undeniable path. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he couldn't turn back. He had to see this through, had to find the truth that had eluded him for so long. And maybe, just maybe, he would finally find the peace he had been searching for, in a place where dreams and reality intertwined, and love transcended even the boundaries of life and death. Enjoying the video? Subscribe to our channel to receive more interesting content. Click the subscribe button and stay updated with the latest news. The drive to the edge of town felt surreal, a blur of shadows and fleeting memories that haunted James as he navigated the winding roads. He and Rebecca had decided to take a leap of faith, to trust in the inexplicable pull of Lily's dreams. They were heading towards the outskirts, to a property long abandoned, where the echoes of the past seemed to intertwine with the present. The house stood at the end of a narrow, tree-lined path, almost hidden by the overgrowth that had crept over the years. It was old, the paint peeling and the windows dark, yet there was something about it that felt oddly familiar, as if he'd stepped into a place that had always existed in his subconscious. James's heart pounded as he pulled the car to a stop, his gaze locked on the silhouette of the house against the dusky sky. This is it, Rebecca whispered from the passenger seat, her voice laced with disbelief. "This is the house from my dreams." James nodded, his throat tight. "It's the same one Emily and I dreamed of building." They exchanged a look filled with fear and wonder. Then, without another word, they got out of the car. Lily clambered out, her small face alight with excitement as she ran towards the house, her footsteps echoing in the quiet evening. "Lily, wait," Rebecca called, but the little girl was already halfway up the porch steps, her laughter ringing out in the stillness. James felt a surge of panic. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice tense. "We don't know what's inside." But Lily turned to them, her eyes wide and clear. "She's here," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Emily's waiting for us." Rebecca's hand tightened on James's arm, and he could feel her trembling. "This is crazy," she murmured. "What are we doing?" James swallowed, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we've come this far. We have to see it through." Together, they climbed the steps, the wood creaking under their feet. The front door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning them inside. James hesitated, then pushed it open, his breath catching as he stepped over the threshold. The interior was dim, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. But beyond the grime and neglect, there was a strange, almost palpable energy that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The living room was empty, the furniture covered in white sheets, like ghosts frozen in time. A grand piano stood in one corner, its keys yellowed with age, and James's heart twisted painfully at the sight of it. "This is it," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "This is the house we imagined." Rebecca's eyes were wide as she looked around, taking in every detail. "It's exactly like the dreams," she breathed. "How is this possible?" Before James could answer, Lily skipped into the room, her small hands trailing over the dusty surfaces. She stopped in front of the piano, her gaze intent. Then, without hesitation, she reached up and pressed a single key. The note rang out, clear and pure, echoing through the empty house. "She used to play here," Lily said softly. She was happy. James felt a lump form in his throat. "How do you know that, Lily?" The little girl looked up at him, her expression serene and knowing. "She told me. She said this was where she wanted to be, with you." Rebecca's breath hitched, and James reached out, taking her hand in his. "I don't understand any of this," he whispered, "but I believe her. I believe Lily." Rebecca nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "So do I." They stood there, the three of them, united by a force they couldn't see but could undeniably feel. And then, as if summoned by their collective will, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The air grew thick and charged, and James's heart raced as a soft, almost imperceptible sound filled the room. A whisper. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but it grew louder, more distinct, and James's pulse quickened as he realized it was a voice. A woman's voice, speaking in soft, broken fragments. "James, I'm here." He froze, his breath catching in his throat. "Emily," he whispered, his voice trembling. Rebecca's grip tightened on his hand as the voice seemed to swirl around them, echoing off the walls, weaving through the space between them. "Thank you for finding me." James's eyes filled with tears. "Emily, what is this? What's happening?" There was a pause, a silence so profound it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. And then, the voice came again, clearer this time, filled with a warmth and love that wrapped around him like a blanket. "You have to let me go, James. I've been waiting for you to find peace." He shook his head, the pain of her loss still raw after all these years. "I don't know how," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to let you go." Lily stepped forward, her small face serious. "It's okay, Mr. James. She's not gone. She's just somewhere else. Somewhere she can be happy." James looked at the little girl, at the wisdom in her innocent eyes, and something inside him shifted. It was as if a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying began to lift, leaving him lighter, freer. "I'm sorry, Emily," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." The voice was softer now, almost a caress. "It wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. But you have to live, James. You have to let me go so you can live." He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He felt Rebecca's hand in his, her strength grounding him, and he knew, in that moment, that he wasn't alone, that he didn't have to carry this burden by himself anymore. "I love you," he said, the words a quiet promise, a farewell that had been waiting to be spoken for so long. "I'll always love you. And I'll always be with you," the voice whispered, fading like the last light of day. "Goodbye, my love." The air seemed to shimmer, and then the presence was gone, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost sacred. James stood there, his heart aching but also strangely at peace. He turned to Rebecca, his eyes searching hers. "It's over," he said softly. "She's gone." Rebecca nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But she's not really gone, is she?" James shook his head, a small, sad smile tugging at his lips. "No, she's not. She's a part of us now. A part of Lily, a part of this place. And that's enough." They stood there, wrapped in the quiet, letting the moment settle around them like a benediction. And for the first time in years, James felt something he hadn't thought possible: hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward, a way to build a new life from the ashes of the old. Lily came to stand between them, her small hand slipping into his. "Can we go home now?" James looked down at her, his heart full. "Yes, sweetheart," he said gently. "We can go home." And as they walked out of the house together, the past finally at rest, James knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Because some bonds were stronger than time, stronger than death, and in that strength, they had found something beautiful, something worth holding on to. They had found each other. The days that followed felt like stepping out of a dense fog and into the light. James woke each morning with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in decades. It was as if a door had been opened, letting in fresh air and sunlight, chasing away the shadows that had lingered for so long. He was beginning to believe that perhaps Emily had found her peace, and that he could, too. But there were still questions, mysteries that clung to the edges of his mind, refusing to let go. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, more to the strange connection between Rebecca's family and his own. So, he and Rebecca decided to dig deeper, to find out the truth about their intertwined histories. One evening, they sat together at the dining table in James's mansion, documents and old photographs spread out before them. Rebecca was poring over a genealogy chart, her brow furrowed in concentration. James watched her, marveling at her resilience, her strength. In the weeks they had known each other, she had become more than just a companion in this journey. She had become someone he relied on, someone he cared for deeply. "I found something," she said suddenly, breaking his reverie. James leaned closer, his heart quickening. "What is it?" Rebecca pointed to a name on the chart. "Look here. Elizabeth Johnson, my great-grandmother. And here, Charles Donovan. They were married in 1937. That means..." James's eyes widened as he connected the dots. "That means we're related," he murmured, stunned. "Emily and I..." He paused, trying to make sense of it all. "She was my cousin?" Rebecca nodded slowly, her expression mirroring his disbelief. "Second cousins, I think. But still, it's incredible." James sat back, his mind racing. It was a revelation that changed everything and nothing all at once. It explained the strange sense of familiarity, the way Emily had seemed like a part of him from the moment they met. But it also deepened the mystery of why Lily knew so much about her. How could a family connection explain something so profoundly unexplainable? "Do you think Emily knew?" Rebecca asked softly. James shook his head, still trying to process it all. "I don't know. We never talked much about family history. We were always so focused on the future." He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of lost possibilities. "Maybe she did, or maybe it didn't matter to her. She just loved me." "And you loved her," Rebecca said gently. He looked at her, his chest tightening with emotions that were both painful and freeing. "Yes," he whispered. I loved her more than anything." They fell into a thoughtful silence, the room filled with the soft crackle of the fireplace and the faint rustle of papers. Outside, the night pressed close, a blanket of darkness that felt oddly comforting. Rebecca spoke again, her voice hesitant. "Do you think that's why she knows things? Because of the family connection?" James frowned, turning the thought over in his mind. "I don't know," he admitted. "It doesn't explain everything. There has to be more to it, something beyond just blood ties." Rebecca nodded, her gaze distant. "I've been thinking about that too. I mean, what if it's not just about family? What if it's something spiritual? Something beyond what we understand?" James hesitated, the word spiritual hanging heavy between them. He'd never been a man of faith, never one to believe in anything he couldn't see or touch. But the past few weeks had shaken his certainty, opened him to possibilities he'd never considered. "I don't know," he said again, but his voice lacked the conviction it once had. "Maybe," Rebecca sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I've been reading about reincarnation, about souls that are connected across lifetimes. It sounds crazy, I know, but what if Lily is somehow connected to Emily's soul? What if she's here to help you let go, to help you both find peace?" The idea was as terrifying as it was comforting. James looked at Rebecca, seeing the hope and fear warring in her eyes, and felt something inside him shift. Could it really be possible? Could love and loss transcend time, linking them all in ways they couldn't comprehend? "I don't know if I believe in that," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "But I can't deny what I've seen, what I've felt. Maybe there's more to this world than we can understand." Rebecca reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I don't have all the answers, James, but I believe that everything happens for a reason. I believe that Lily was meant to find you, and that we were meant to find each other." He looked down at their joined hands, warmth spreading through him. "I want to believe that," he murmured. "I really do." They stayed like that for a while, the silence between them gentle, filled with unspoken promises and shared fears. It was a peace James had never thought he would find again, a sense of belonging that went beyond the physical, beyond the tangible. He felt connected, not just to Rebecca and Lily, but to something larger, something that transcended the boundaries of life and death. The next day, they decided to visit the town archives, hoping to find more information about their family's shared history. The building was old, its walls lined with shelves that groaned under the weight of decades of forgotten stories. They combed through records and newspaper clippings, piecing together a picture of a time long past. It was in an old journal, tucked away in the corner of a dusty shelf, that they found what they were looking for. The journal belonged to Elizabeth Johnson, Rebecca's great-grandmother, and its pages were filled with stories of love and loss, of dreams and disappointments. James read aloud, his voice trembling as he reached the final entries. "I've loved Charles Donovan my whole life, but we can never be together. Our families wouldn't understand. But I know that one day, our souls will find each other again. I believe that love like ours doesn't end, even when life does." Rebecca gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. She knew. She knew that you and Emily would find each other. James's heart pounded in his chest as he turned the page, but the rest of the journal was blank, the story unfinished. He closed the book, his hands shaking. "She believed in something bigger than herself," he said quietly. "Something that we're only just beginning to understand." Rebecca looked at him, her eyes shining. "So what now?" He took a deep breath, the path ahead of them suddenly clear. "Now we finish what she started. We find out everything we can. And we figure out what this means for us, for Lily, for everyone." They left the archives feeling lighter, the pieces of the puzzle finally beginning to fall into place. There were still so many questions, so many uncertainties, but James felt a sense of purpose, a drive that had been missing for so long. He was no longer running from the past, no longer haunted by what he had lost. He was moving forward, one step at a time, guided by the love that had brought them all together. And as he looked at Rebecca and Lily, walking beside him, he knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Because some stories didn't end with goodbye. Some stories were just waiting for the right moment to begin again. The revelation of the shared past between James and Rebecca's families lingered in the air, a new thread weaving through the fabric of their intertwined lives. It was as if they were characters in a story written long before they were born, drawn together by forces neither could fully comprehend. As they drove back from the town archives, the sun dipping low in the sky, James felt a strange sense of anticipation thrumming through him. Back at the mansion, they gathered in the living room, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Lily was playing on the floor with her dolls, her laughter a bright, clear sound that filled the room with warmth. James watched her, his heart swelling with a tenderness that surprised him. She was so innocent, so untouched by the weight of the past that seemed to press down on him and Rebecca. "Lily," he said gently, kneeling beside her, "can we talk for a minute?" The little girl looked up, her blue eyes wide and curious. "Okay, Mr. James," she said, setting her dolls aside. "What do you want to talk about?" James glanced at Rebecca, who nodded, her gaze encouraging. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "You know how you've been having those dreams? About the house and Emily?" Lily nodded, her expression serious. "Yes, she's my friend." James's heart ached at the simplicity of her words. He wished he could see the world as she did, free from the doubts and fears that clouded his mind. "Do you know why she talks to you?" Lily tilted her head, thinking. "She says it's because we're connected, like a big circle. She was sad because she couldn't talk to you, but now she's happy because I'm here." The words hung in the air, shimmering with a truth that defied explanation. James swallowed hard, his throat tight. "How do you know all these things, Lily?" The little girl shrugged, her smile sweet and guileless. "I just know. It's like a story I read a long time ago. I don't remember all of it, but I remember the important parts." James felt a shiver run down his spine. It was as if Emily's spirit was speaking through this child, bridging the gap between the past and the present. He reached out, taking Lily's small hand in his. "Can you tell me what Emily wants?" Lily's eyes grew distant, her gaze unfocused as if she were looking at something far away. "She wants you to be happy, Mr. James. She says you've been sad for too long, and it's time to let go. She's not gone. She's still here, in the stars and the flowers and the wind." James blinked back tears, the room blurring around him. He had spent so many years lost in grief, unable to see beyond the darkness that had enveloped him. But now, through Lily's words, he felt a lightness he hadn't known in decades, a sense of release, of hope. "Thank you, Lily," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for bringing her back to me." Lily leaned forward, her little arms wrapping around his neck in a hug that was pure and unconditional. "You're welcome, Mr. James," she said softly. "Emily loves you very much. She wants you to know that." James held her close, his heart full to bursting. When he finally let her go, he looked at Rebecca, who was watching them with tears in her eyes. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice shaky. Rebecca nodded, her smile radiant and full of wonder. "Yes, I think she's right. I think Emily's still with us, in a way we can't understand." They sat together, the three of them, united by the love that had bridged time and space, by the bonds that had brought them together. It felt like the beginning of something new, something beautiful and unbreakable. Over the next few days, James found himself opening up to Rebecca in ways he hadn't thought possible. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams, their laughter echoing through the house that had once been filled only with silence and sorrow. There was a lightness in his heart now, a sense of joy that bubbled up unexpectedly, catching him off guard. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Rebecca turned to him, her eyes shining in the soft glow of the moonlight. "I think we're going to be okay, James," she said quietly. "All of us." James nodded, feeling the truth of her words deep in his soul. "Yeah, I think so too." Lily's dreams continued, vivid and full of the same strange wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her years. She spoke often of Emily, of the love and happiness that still lingered in the places they had shared. It was as if she were a bridge between two worlds, carrying messages of hope and healing. One night, James found her sitting by the window, her small face bathed in the silver light of the moon. She looked up as he approached, her expression thoughtful. "Are you okay, Lily?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, her gaze drifting back to the sky. "Yes, I was just talking to Emily. She's so happy now, Mr. James. She says it's okay to move on." James's heart swelled, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Is that what she said?" Lily nodded, her smile serene. "Yes, she wants you to be happy. She wants us all to be happy." He knelt beside her, taking her small hand in his. "I think I can do that," he said softly. "I think I can be happy again." And for the first time in years, he believed it. He believed in the possibility of new beginnings, of love and laughter and joy. He believed that the past, with all its pain and loss, didn't have to define his future. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between them grew stronger, deeper. They were a family now, bound not by blood but by something far more powerful. James found himself looking forward to the future, to the life they were building together. He and Rebecca started to make plans, small ones at first, like taking Lily to the beach or fixing up the old house they had found. But as time went on, their dreams grew bigger, bolder. They talked about opening a community center, a place where people could come together, where no one would have to face the darkness alone. It was a dream that gave James a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. He could see it all so clearly, the bright, welcoming space, the laughter and hope that would fill it. It was a way to honor Emily's memory, to carry on the love and kindness she had brought into his life. And through it all, Lily was their guiding light, her innocent wisdom leading them forward. She seemed to know things before they did, her dreams filled with a certainty that left them in awe. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Lily looked up at James, her eyes sparkling. "We're going to be so happy, Mr. James," she said with the conviction only a child could possess. "All of us." James smiled, his heart full. "Yes, sweetheart," he said softly, "we are." And he believed it, with every fiber of his being. Because he had found something more precious than answers or explanations. He had found a family, a love that transcended time and loss, a future that was brighter than he had ever dared to dream. And for the first time in years, he felt truly, deeply alive. The summer days drifted by in a blur of sunshine and laughter. For the first time in years, James felt the heavy shadow of the past lifting. He spent his days working on the house with Rebecca, making it their own, while Lily's joyful presence filled the rooms with life. It was as if they were healing the broken pieces of themselves, one brushstroke of paint and one shared smile at a time. But as the house took shape, so did the lingering questions. What did it all mean? This strange connection that had brought them together. Was it enough to simply move forward? Or did they need to face the past more directly, to confront the unresolved threads that still bound them? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a soft, dusky purple, James and Rebecca sat on the porch, their hands entwined. Lily was inside, humming softly as she arranged her dolls in a neat row along the windowsill. "Do you ever wonder," James began, his voice tentative, "if we're supposed to do something more with all of this?" Rebecca looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "Everything that's happened. Finding each other, Lily's dreams, the way we're connected to the past. It feels like it's all leading somewhere, like there's something we're supposed to do. I don't know. Maybe it's just me overthinking things." Rebecca squeezed his hand, her expression tender. "I've thought about that too, about what it all means. And I think you're right. I think there's a reason for all of this. But I don't think we're supposed to figure it out alone." James nodded, a sense of resolve settling over him. "Maybe it's time we go back, to where it all began." "The old house?" Rebecca's voice was soft, but there was an undercurrent of fear in it. He nodded. "Yes, I think we need to go back there, to say goodbye properly, to let go, the way Emily asked me to." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky. Then she nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. "Okay, let's do it." The drive to the old farmhouse was filled with a tense, electric silence. James's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as the landscape blurred past, familiar yet strange in the fading light. He glanced at Rebecca, who was staring out the window, her expression unreadable. Lily sat between them, uncharacteristically quiet, her small hands folded in her lap. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" James asked, his voice gentle. Lily looked up at him, her eyes calm and steady. "Yes, Mr. James. Emily's waiting for us. She's happy we're coming." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. He glanced at Rebecca, who met his gaze with a faint, brave smile. They were all feeling it, the pull of the past, the weight of what they were about to face. The house loomed up ahead, its dark silhouette stark against the twilight sky. James parked the car, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was thick with the scent of earth and wildflowers, the only sounds the distant call of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the wind. They got out of the car, and James took Rebecca's hand, drawing strength from her presence. Lily led the way, her steps sure and confident, as if she knew exactly where she was going. They entered the house, the air inside cool and still. Dust motes floated in the fading light, and the silence was deep, almost reverent. James's heart ached with the weight of memories, of what could have been, of the love and life he had lost. But this time, he wasn't facing it alone. Lily walked to the center of the room and stopped, turning to look at them. "She's here," she said softly. "She wants to talk to you." James felt his breath catch. "To me?" Lily nodded, her face serious. "She wants you to know that she's okay. That it's time for you to be happy, Mr. James." James's throat tightened. He stepped forward, feeling as if he were moving through water. "Emily," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I miss you. I'm trying to let go, but it's so hard." The air seemed to shift, a soft, warm breeze swirling through the room. Lily smiled, her eyes bright with something beyond her years. "She knows, Mr. James. She says it's okay. She wants you to be happy, to love again." Tears blurred his vision. He turned to Rebecca, who was watching him with a look of such tenderness and understanding that it took his breath away. "I don't know how to say goodbye," he said, his voice trembling. "I've held on for so long. I don't know who I am without her." Rebecca stepped forward, her hands framing his face, her touch gentle. "You don't have to let go of her, James. She'll always be a part of you. But it's okay to open your heart to something new. To us. To this life we're building together." He looked into her eyes, seeing the strength and love that had brought them this far, and something inside him shifted. It wasn't about forgetting Emily or leaving her behind. It was about carrying her love forward, about building something beautiful from the ashes of the past. "I want that," he whispered. "I want to build a life with you and Lily." Rebecca's smile was radiant, a beacon of light in the darkness. "Then let's do it. Together." And in that moment, James felt a peace he hadn't known in decades, a lightness that lifted him up, freeing him from the chains of grief and guilt that had bound him for so long. "Goodbye, Emily," he whispered, his voice filled with love and gratitude. "Thank you for everything. I'll always love you." The room seemed to shimmer, a soft, golden light filling the space. And then it was gone, leaving behind a sense of calm, of closure. James took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Are you ready to go home?" Rebecca asked, her voice warm and steady. James nodded, his heart full. "Yes, I'm ready." They left the house together, stepping out into the cool night air. As they walked to the car, Lily's small hand slipped into his, her touch grounding him, connecting him to the present, to the future they were building together. And for the first time in years, James felt truly free. The following weeks passed in a joyous blur. James and Rebecca threw themselves into building the community center they had dreamed of, a place where people could find hope and healing, where no one would feel alone or abandoned. It was a labor of love, a testament to the new life they were creating. Lily thrived in this new environment, her laughter a constant reminder of the resilience and beauty of the human spirit. She became the heart of the center, her bright energy drawing people in, her innocence and wisdom bridging the gaps between strangers. James watched her one afternoon, his heart swelling with pride. She was sitting in the middle of a group of children, telling them a story, her face animated and full of light. He glanced at Rebecca, who was standing beside him, her smile radiant. "She's amazing," he said softly. Rebecca nodded, her eyes shining. "She is. And so are you, James. You've come so far." He turned to her, his heart full to bursting. "I couldn't have done it without you. You and Lily. You've given me a reason to live again." Rebecca reached up, cupping his cheek, her touch warm and loving. "We're a team now. We've got each other." James leaned down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her lips, feeling the truth of her words deep in his soul. They were a team, a family, bound not by blood but by love and faith and hope. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting the world in a golden glow, James felt a peace he had never thought possible. The past, with all its pain and loss, had finally been laid to rest. And in its place, there was something new, something beautiful and strong. He took Rebecca's hand, his gaze sweeping over the community center, over the smiling faces of the people they had brought together. This was their legacy, their gift to the world. A place of love and acceptance, of healing and hope. And as he looked at Lily, her bright laughter filling the air, he knew that Emily was smiling down on them, her love woven into the fabric of their lives, guiding them forward. "We did it," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder and gratitude. "We really did it." Rebecca squeezed his hand, her smile radiant. "Yes, we did. And this is just the beginning." James nodded, his heart full. They had found their way through the darkness, had built something beautiful from the ruins of the past. And now, as they stood on the threshold of a new future, he knew that they would face it together, with courage and love and hope. Because some bonds were stronger than time, stronger than death. And in those bonds, they had found something truly extraordinary. A family, a home, a love that would last forever. We hope you were moved and inspired by our story. We want to hear your opinion. Leave a comment below, share your impressions, and your own stories of resilience and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next emotional videos. Join us on this journey and follow more incredible stories. See you next time.